A retired Navy SEAL found a German Shepherd puppy waiting inside Mailbox 48. She was warm, healthy, and carefully hidden, meaning someone had chosen exactly who would find her. The puppy soon revealed a secret tied to his aging K9 partner and a town that depended on the people behind it. To protect her, he would have to risk jobs, friendships, and the fragile peace he had built after losing his wife. But what does loyalty mean when doing the right thing may hurt innocent people too? This is a story about a man, 2 dogs, and the courage to reopen a road grief had closed. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Winter did not attack Bellwether, Vermont. It arrived like an old woman laying clean sheets over a bed, slowly, thoroughly, and with no concern for whether anyone was ready. Snow rounded the roofs of the red farmhouses, softened the stone walls along the county road, and gathered in the bare arms of the maple trees. The creek through town had frozen beneath a milky skin of ice. Above the chimneys, pale columns of smoke rose into a sky so blue it looked polished. 10 miles beyond the town square, the old postal road narrowed between white fields and dark pines. At its end stood Caleb Rourke's house, built from weathered cedar and stubbornness. The porch leaned slightly toward the eastern hill. A stack of split firewood rested beneath the eaves. Beside the door hung a gray wool scarf that had not been worn in 2 years. Caleb passed it every morning. He never touched it. At 52, he was still a tall man, a little over 6 feet, with the broad shoulders of someone who had spent his adult life carrying weight without discussing it. His strength no longer belonged to parade grounds or military training rooms. It lived in his rough hands, in the muscles earned lifting generators, dragging frozen hoses, and crawling beneath broken heating units while Vermont Wind searched for gaps in his clothing. That morning, he wore his usual olive-drab combat shirt beneath a brown canvas coat. The camouflage sleeves were faded at the elbows, and horizontal reinforcement bands crossed his upper arms. His dark work pants carried old traces of grease. Silver had begun to settle heavily at his temples, framing a face made more thoughtful than handsome by time. His nose bent slightly left from an old break, and a short brown-gray beard shadowed his jaw. He looked like a man who had once belonged in photographs and had since learned to avoid them. Flint waited beside the porch steps. The 9-year-old German Shepherd had a black saddle over a honey-gold coat and a thick mane around his neck that made him look grander than he felt before breakfast. His muzzle had begun to silver. One ear stood straight, while the other tipped outward at the top, giving him the permanent expression of someone listening to a conversation in the next room. "Ready?" Caleb asked. Flint rose, stretched his front legs, and took his time extending the left hind leg. Caleb looked toward the tree line. Flint sniffed a patch of clean snow with great concentration. Neither acknowledged the stiffness. They had lived together long enough to understand that dignity was sometimes a small lie offered out of love. Their morning walk followed the old postal road toward a backup power station on the ridge. Caleb checked the generator there 3 times a week, though the county had never asked him to do it that often. Machines made promises that could be tested. Fuel lines froze, belts loosened, batteries failed. A man could open a metal panel, find the problem, and replace the damaged part. Grief had no panel. It had no manual either, which Caleb considered poor engineering. 2 years earlier, his wife had organized a volunteer network for elderly residents and veterans living beyond the plowed roads. She mapped every isolated house in red pencil, marked medication schedules in blue, and kept a list of dogs requiring special food in the right-hand drawer beneath the kitchen telephone. Caleb had driven the truck. He cleared snow, repaired furnaces, carried groceries, and complained whenever she added one more name to a route already too long. She had always smiled and added it anyway. After she died, Caleb told everyone the program had ended because there were not enough volunteers. Then he said the truck needed repairs. Later, he claimed insurance had become complicated. The truth remained pinned to the kitchen wall. Every road on her map led somewhere he had once gone with her. So Caleb stopped going. Flint was the only companion who still walked those roads with him, and Flint had never asked why the delivery crates gathered dust in the shed. They had gone nearly a mile when Flint slowed beside House 48. The property belonged to a family from Boston who used it during summers and Christmas holidays. Its pale yellow siding looked almost white beneath the snow, and shutters covered the downstairs windows. No smoke rose from the chimney. The driveway had not been plowed since December. Flint stopped at the roadside mailbox. Beneath the ordinary metal box stood a larger parcel container, the kind built to hold grocery deliveries or packages too large for the post. It rested on short legs above the snowbank, secured by a simple exterior latch. "Nothing for us," Caleb said. Flint did not move. His head lowered. The black nose touched the seam of the parcel door. Then he tilted his head and pressed one ear against the metal. Caleb watched him for several seconds. Flint looked back. It was not alarm in the dog's amber eyes. It was insistence. Then Caleb heard it. A faint scratching sound came from inside the box. Not frantic, not loud. 3 tiny taps against fabric, followed by silence. Caleb stepped off the road and brushed snow from the lid. He checked the sides first. Narrow ventilation holes had been drilled beneath the overhang, too neat to be accidental. A fresh tire track curved away from the mailbox and continued toward an abandoned bus shelter farther down the road. Someone had been there recently. Caleb lifted the latch. Inside, wrapped in a blue wool blanket, lay a German Shepherd puppy. She was small enough to fit beneath Flint's chest, perhaps 8 weeks old, with long legs she had not yet learned to organize. Her coat was golden along the paws and face, with a soft black mantle across her back. One ear stood halfway upright, the other folded toward the side. Her eyes opened when the light reached her. Brown, tired, watchful. She did not bark. Caleb removed one glove and placed 2 fingers against the puppy's neck. Her pulse was quick but steady. Her body felt cool, not dangerously cold. Beneath the blanket were 2 veterinary warming pads, still faintly active, a small bottle of water, and insulation arranged carefully around the edges of the compartment. This was not careless abandonment. Whoever had placed the puppy there had expected her to survive. That realization unsettled Caleb more than cruelty would have. Cruelty was simple. It revealed what a person was. Care mixed with secrecy raised questions. The puppy lifted her nose toward his bare hand. She sniffed once, then drew back beneath the blanket. "Easy," Caleb murmured. Flint moved closer. His body stiffened when he saw the puppy, not in aggression but uncertainty. He sniffed the edge of the blanket and turned his face away, as though the matter was beneath the attention of a retired professional. The puppy made a small sound. Flint's tipped ear rotated back toward her. Caleb looked along the empty road. Sunlight glittered across the fields. The tire tracks were already beginning to soften beneath drifting snow. He took out his phone. The nearest animal control officer would need at least 40 minutes. The wind had begun to rise, carrying loose powder over the asphalt in silver ribbons. Caleb imagined waiting beside the mailbox while the puppy's warmth faded 1 degree at a time. He also imagined carrying her home. That thought brought a different kind of cold. "No," he said quietly, though neither dog had asked a question. Flint lowered himself in front of the open parcel box. His back formed a wall against the wind. Get up. Flint looked toward the frozen field. Flint. The dog rested his chin on his front paws. Caleb stared at him. Flint had ignored commands only a handful of times in his life. Most had involved injured people, dangerous roads, or squirrels with unusually poor judgment. This situation apparently belonged in the same category. "You're retired," Caleb reminded him. Flint closed his eyes. It was the canine equivalent of hanging up the telephone. Caleb exhaled slowly and reached into the parcel box. The puppy weighed almost nothing beneath the blanket. She trembled once when he lifted her, then pressed her nose against the front of his coat. "One night," he told Flint. Flint stood immediately. That is not agreement. The German Shepherd started toward home. Caleb followed, carrying the puppy against his chest. Halfway back, the little dog pushed her head from the blanket. Snowflakes landed on her black nose. She sneezed, startled herself, and tried to retreat so quickly that one paw became tangled in the wool. Flint stopped and looked back. For the first time that morning, his tail moved. Only once. At the house, Caleb placed the puppy near the hearth while he filled a bowl with lukewarm water. Flint watched from the doorway with the grave suspicion of a landlord discovering an unapproved tenant. The puppy drank too quickly. Flint stepped forward when she approached his steel bowl. "That's yours," Caleb said. Flint gave him a look, suggesting he was aware of the property arrangement. The puppy placed both front paws on the rim and drank anyway. Flint turned his head toward the wall. Caleb almost smiled. He found an old wooden bowl in the pantry and set it beside the stove. Years ago, it had held keys and loose screws. Before that, his wife had used it for apples. He washed it, filled it with water, and slid it toward the puppy. She ignored it and returned to Flint's bowl. "Strong start," Caleb said, already disrespecting boundaries. The puppy waddled toward the hearth and collapsed onto the thick wool blanket closest to the fire. Flint's blanket. The old dog stood over her for a long moment. The arrow-shaped streak of gold on his forehead deepened when he frowned. The puppy opened one eye. Flint sighed and walked to the other side of the room, where he lowered himself onto the bare floor with theatrical suffering. Caleb removed his coat and hung it beside the gray scarf. The fabric shifted slightly from the movement. For 1 second, he could see his wife returning from a winter route, cheeks red from cold, laughing because she had once again forgotten where she left her gloves. The memory was so clear that Caleb's hand rose before he understood what he was doing. His fingers stopped an inch from the scarf. Behind him, the puppy whimpered. Caleb let his hand fall. "Temporary," he said. Flint looked at him from the floor. "That's what she is." The puppy lifted her head at the sound of his voice. "Temporary is too long for a name." Caleb considered her mismatched ears, her oversized feet, and the stubborn way she had claimed Flint's bowl within minutes of entering the house. "Tess," he said at last. "Close enough." The puppy sneezed again. Flint rested his head between his paws, unconvinced by the naming process. As evening settled over Bellwether, the sky turned lavender behind the pines. Caleb warmed a small meal for Tess and checked her paws, ears, gums, and belly. She had no obvious injuries. Whoever had cared for her before placing her in the box had done it well. That fact remained lodged in his mind like a splinter. Later, when a log cracked in the hearth, Tess sprang awake. She scrambled backward until her body struck the stone edge of the fireplace. Before Caleb could move, Flint rose. The old German shepherd did not approach Tess directly. He stepped between her and the fire, then lay down with his back toward the flames. His body blocked the popping light and most of the sound. Tess stared at him. Slowly, she crawled forward. She placed one paw against Flint's tail. Flint glanced over his shoulder, deeply offended. But he stayed where he was. That night, Caleb fell asleep in the armchair without meaning to. When he woke, the fire had burned low, leaving the room lit by amber coals and moonlight reflected from the snow. Tess slept against Flint's chest. Her breathing was small and uneven, the rhythm of a creature not yet certain the world would remain safe while she slept. Flint was awake. His amber eyes watched the door, the windows, and Caleb in turn. For 2 years, the house had contained only 2 heartbeats. One belonged to a man who had forgotten how to live beyond necessity. The other belonged to a dog growing older beside him. Now there was a third. Caleb should have felt comforted by it. Instead, fear settled quietly beneath his ribs. Flint would not always be there. Caleb knew that truth whenever the old dog hesitated on the stairs or stretched his hind leg on cold mornings. Love had already taught Caleb what it could take when it left. Tess had brought warmth into the room without asking permission. She had also brought the possibility of another goodbye. Caleb looked at the gray scarf beside the door, then at the 2 dogs sleeping near the fading fire. He had spent 2 years making his world small enough that nothing new could be lost. Now something new had already begun breathing inside it. By 8 the next morning, Bellwether had begun to shine. Sunlight touched the snowbanks along Main Street, turning their frozen edges into pale blue glass. Shopkeepers swept powder from their steps. A delivery truck idled outside the bakery, its exhaust drifting past wreaths that had remained in the windows long after Christmas. The town looked clean, orderly, and innocent in the way small towns often did before everyone had heard the same rumor. Caleb parked outside Carver Veterinary Clinic and sat behind the wheel for several seconds. Tess had fallen asleep inside a laundry basket lined with towels. One oversized paw rested over the edge. Flint sat beside her in the back of the truck, facing the window as if he had no connection whatsoever to the arrangement. "You allowed this," Caleb told him. Flint turned his tipped ear towards the voice but kept looking outside. The clinic occupied a 2-story brick house near the town square. Its front windows were painted with faded white snowflakes, and a wooden sign above the porch showed the silhouette of a dog and horse beneath the name Elise Carver, DVM. Dr. Elise Carver opened the door before Caleb could knock. She was 47, lean and straight-backed, with chestnut hair tied low at the nape of her neck. A natural silver streak ran from her left temple into the braid. She wore sage-colored scrubs beneath a cream cardigan and held a mug in one hand. Her eyes went first to the basket, then to Caleb. "You went out for a generator check," she said. "I found a complication." "You always do." Elise stepped aside. Flint entered first, moving with the solemn familiarity of a patient who believed the building existed mainly because of him. He paused at the reception desk, where Elise kept a jar of chicken-free treats for his benefit. "You have not been examined yet," she told him. Flint stared at the jar. "Corruption," Caleb said, "right in front of me." Elise handed Flint a treat. Community medicine requires diplomacy. The humor faded when she lifted Tess from the basket. The puppy stiffened at first, her small body becoming rigid beneath Elise's careful hands. Elise did not pull her closer. She supported Tess beneath the chest and hindquarters, waiting until the puppy's breathing slowed before setting her on the padded examination table. Caleb remained near the door. He had brought injured men to medics in places where the walls shook and the air tasted of dust. Yet watching Elise examine the puppy made him feel oddly exposed, as if bringing Tess into town had changed the matter from an inconvenience into a decision. Elise checked the puppy's gums, teeth, ears, abdomen, paws, and temperature. She examined the pads for cracks and gently separated the fur between the toes. "No frost damage," she said. "No bruising. No untreated infection." "Good. She is mildly dehydrated, but not dangerously. Her nails were trimmed within the last week. Her coat has been brushed, and her ears are clean." Caleb folded his arms. So, someone cared for her. Recently and consistently. Elise opened Tess's mouth again and studied the teeth. 8 weeks, perhaps 9. Healthy weight. No obvious developmental problems. Tess attempted to chew the end of the stethoscope. Elise removed it from her reach. "Strong professional opinion," Caleb said. "She's dangerous." To medical equipment, certainly. Flint stood beside the table, his nose level with Tess's back. The puppy noticed him and shuffled toward the edge. Flint stepped away before she could climb onto his head. The retreat was dignified but immediate. Elise glanced at Caleb. He is adjusting beautifully. He moved 3 feet. For Flint, that is emotional growth. Elise reached for a handheld microchip scanner and passed it slowly over Tess's shoulders. The device remained silent until it crossed the skin between the shoulder blades. A sharp beep filled the room. Tess flattened herself against the table. Flint's head rose. Elise read the number on the screen, then scanned again to confirm it. "There is a chip." "Registered?" She entered the number into 2 national databases. Both searches returned the same result. "No owner, no breeder, no clinic." Caleb looked at the puppy. "Then why implant one?" "Registration can be delayed. Sometimes shelters buy chips in bulk and enter the information later. Breeders do the same." "Can you identify who bought it?" "Not from the public database." Elise enlarged the number on her computer. "The opening digits identify the manufacturer and product line. This series is usually sold in large batches to veterinary hospitals, rescue organizations, or institutional programs. I can request information, but they may require authorization from an animal welfare officer or state investigator. So we have a number that tells us almost nothing." For the moment, Caleb disliked those 3 words. They belonged to hospital corridors, missing person reports, and men waiting for weather to clear. For the moment meant the truth existed somewhere else and had not yet chosen to arrive. Elise removed Tess's white collar to inspect the skin beneath it. There was no name tag, only a small embroidered symbol near the buckle. A simple lamp flame inside a circle. Elise stopped. Caleb noticed the change in her expression. "What?" She turned the collar toward him. "You know that mark?" He did. Nearly every business in Bellwether displayed it somewhere. It appeared on donation plaques, winter festival banners, veterinary assistance forms, and the side of the shuttle that carried older residents to medical appointments. "Hearthlight," Caleb said. Hearthlight Canine Initiative occupied a renovated dairy complex 3 miles north of town. It had begun as a rehabilitation center for service dogs and animals recovering from surgery. Over the years, it expanded into training, boarding, veterinary outreach, and public education. It also paid for half the heating bill at Bellwether's Community Hall. Elise placed the collar beside the scanner. "They use white collars on dogs during intake," she said. "The embroidered version is usually internal, not promotional." "You have worked with them?" "Occasionally. They refer orthopedic cases here when their surgeons are unavailable. I send complex rehabilitation patients to them." Caleb looked at Tess again. The puppy had discovered a corner of the paper sheet and was pulling it toward herself with both paws. Nothing about her looked institutional. Nothing about her looked accidental either. Elise called Hearthlight from the office phone and placed the speaker low enough that Caleb could hear. A receptionist answered with practiced warmth. Elise gave her name, clinic number, the chip code, and a description of the caller. There was a pause. Then the receptionist returned and said, "Hearthlight had no record of a missing puppy matching Tess." Elise thanked her. Before she could end the call, the woman added that Hearthlight could send someone to collect the dog for temporary quarantine, microchip tracing, and owner location services. "How soon?" Elise asked. "Within the hour." Caleb's eyes moved to the clock. He had expected uncertainty. He had not expected speed. Elise ended the call and leaned against the desk. "They denied knowing her," Caleb said. "They did. But they are already sending a vehicle. They operate the town's lost animal support contract. Does that give them custody? Not automatically." The question was no longer who had left Tess in the parcel box. The immediate question was who would decide where she went next. Caleb had spent the night telling himself that Tess did not belong to him. That remained true. But the absence of ownership did not make every claimant equal. Tess crawled toward the edge of the table again. This time Flint did not step away. He stood close enough that her front paws landed between his shoulders. She remained there for 1 second before sliding backward onto the table. Flint looked offended by gravity. Caleb looked at the white collar. "Keep her here until we know more." Elise studied him. "That means someone has to accept temporary responsibility." "I said keep her here. And I have 6 appointments, 2 surgical recoveries, and a goat in the rear ward who believes doors are political oppression." Caleb frowned. Elise took a form from a drawer and placed it in front of him. "Temporary custodian. You authorize examination and agree not to transfer her without notifying the clinic." "I am not adopting her." The form does not contain the word adoption. "It feels implied." "That is your conscience. I did not draft it." Caleb signed. Less than 40 minutes later, a dark green utility vehicle stopped outside. The man who entered carried a new plastic transport crate and a leather folder. He appeared to be in his early 40s, clean-shaven, with carefully parted blonde hair and a navy wool coat bearing the Hearthlight lamp on one sleeve. His name, according to the identification badge clipped near his collar, was Martin Vale, Community Placement Coordinator. He smiled at Elise, then Caleb. The smile changed slightly when he saw Flint. "Dr. Carver, Mr. Rourke, thank you for keeping the puppy safe." Caleb had not introduced himself. Bellwether was small enough that this was not impossible. Still, he remembered the way the man said his name. Not as a question. Martin placed the crate on the floor. "We can take her to our quarantine wing while we trace the chip." "She has been examined," Elise said. "No quarantine is medically required at this point. Our policy applies to all unverified animals. Your policy does not establish custody." Martin opened the folder and produced a transfer form. "Hearthlight administers Bellwether's Lost Animal Program. This is standard." Elise read the first page. "This authorizes permanent placement after 72 hours. Only if no owner is located. The chip trace has not been completed. That is why we have the proper institutional access." Caleb watched Martin's hands. They were steady. His tone remained polite. Nothing in his behavior was openly threatening. That made the pressure more effective. Martin crouched beside the table. Tess saw the crate. Her body changed at once. She backed beneath Flint's chest, pressing herself against his front legs. No bark, no growl. Her breath became shallow, and one paw lifted as though the floor had turned uncertain beneath her. Flint stepped sideways. He placed his body between Tess and the open crate. He did not bare his teeth. He did not make a sound. His head remained level, amber eyes fixed on Martin. Martin stopped moving. For a fraction of a second, the pleasant expression disappeared. He shifted backward too quickly and nearly struck the chair behind him. Flint had not threatened him, but Martin had reacted like a man who knew exactly what a trained German shepherd could do. Caleb moved beside Flint. "She stays." Martin stood. "Mr. Rourke, this animal may belong to a breeder or client who is already searching for her. Then they can provide proof. Hearthlight can resolve this more efficiently. Efficiency is not ownership." Martin's smile returned, thinner now. "You are creating unnecessary difficulty." Caleb looked at the crate, the permanent placement clause, and the puppy hiding behind Flint. "I have been accused of worse." Elise handed the unsigned form back. "Without proof of ownership, a court order, or authorization from animal control, I will not release her." Martin held her gaze for a moment, then closed the folder. "Of course, we only want what is best for the animal." "So do we," Elise said. The words sounded similar. Their meanings did not. After Martin left, the clinic seemed quieter than before. Flint watched the utility vehicle until it disappeared beyond the square. Only then did he step away from Tess. The puppy immediately followed him. Caleb saw Elise watching both dogs. "His reaction is not evidence," she said. "I know. And hers is not proof that Hearthlight harmed her. I know that too. But?" Caleb looked toward the window. "But they arrived faster than animal control ever has." Near noon, the front door opened again. This time, an older woman entered carrying a canvas mail bag and stamping snow from practical black boots. Celia Boone had delivered Bellwether's rural mail for nearly 30 years. She was 63, compact and sturdy, with silver-brown hair escaping from beneath a knitted cap. Her cheeks were bright from the cold, and her eyes held the direct curiosity of someone who spent her life noticing which houses had stopped receiving newspapers. "I heard the puppy was here," she said. Caleb raised an eyebrow. Celia removed one glove. "I deliver mail. I do not take vows of silence." She approached Tess slowly and stopped several feet away. "That is her." "You saw her yesterday?" Elise asked. "I saw the woman who left her." The room changed. Celia explained that she had been driving the east route 15 minutes before Caleb reached House 48. A gray station wagon was parked near the abandoned bus shelter. A woman in a long gray coat carried a blue-wrapped bundle to the parcel box. "She did not throw it in and run," Celia said. "She checked the vents twice, put her hand inside, waited, then walked back to the shelter." "Could you see her face?" Caleb asked. "Not clearly. Mid-50s, perhaps. Thin. Light-colored hair." "Did she leave?" "Not immediately." Celia looked toward Tess. She stayed behind the shelter wall. From there she could see the road without being easily seen from it. Caleb pictured the fresh tire track, the careful warming pads, the water bottle, the timing. "She watched me find Tess." Celia nodded. "And after you carried the puppy away, the gray car left in the opposite direction." Elise folded her arms. "So Tess was not abandoned." "No," Caleb said. The conclusion carried more weight than comfort. Someone had chosen the location, the hour, and perhaps Caleb himself. That evening, Tess returned to the Cedar House at the end of the postal road. Caleb disconnected the doorbell after its first ring sent her scrambling behind the kitchen table. He did not know whether the sound frightened her because of Hearthlight, a previous home, or simply because she was young and the world was loud. He refused to invent an answer where none existed. Flint settled a few feet from the table. He did not look beneath it. He did not nudge Tess or demand that she come out. He rested his head on his paws and waited. Minutes passed. Caleb sat at the kitchen counter with the white collar in front of him. The small lamp symbol caught the light. Eventually, Tess crawled from beneath the table. She did not go to Caleb. She crossed the floor to Flint and placed one paw on the end of his tail. Flint turned his head. His expression suggested several formal complaints, but he did not move his tail. Tess lowered herself beside it. Caleb had once believed safety came from strong walls, clear exits, and knowing who stood on the other side of a door. Those things mattered. He had built much of his life around them. Flint understood something quieter. Safety was also the freedom to approach without being pulled, to remain without being trapped, to trust because no one had demanded it. Caleb looked again at the collar and the lamp stitched into its fabric. Tess had not been discarded. She had been delivered, and whoever had chosen him had trusted that he would understand the difference. The first clue did not arrive with a threat, a hidden vehicle, or another carefully worded visit from Hearthlight. It appeared beneath the examination lamp in Elise Carver's clinic. 3 days after Caleb signed the temporary custody form, Tess stood on the padded table trying to bite the metal clip of Elise's stethoscope. Her energy had returned quickly. She had gained nearly a pound, learned that the clinic's lower cabinets contained nothing edible, and developed a deep, personal objection to being weighed. Flint waited beside the table. He looked healthier than he had during the coldest part of winter, though the stiffness in his left hind leg still showed when he rose too quickly. Tess had begun following his movements with serious concentration. When Flint sat, she sat. When he turned his head toward a sound, she copied him half a second later. When Flint ignored an instruction, she appeared to regard that as advanced training. Elise ran one hand carefully along Tess's jaw. "Look at this," she said. Caleb stood near the window with a paper cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. "What am I looking at?" "The width through the lower jaw, and the set of her eyes. She is a German shepherd. They tend to resemble other German shepherds." Elise lifted the fur behind Tess's left ear. A narrow gray mark curved through the gold, almost hidden unless the light struck it directly. Flint had a similar streak behind the same ear. Caleb saw it. He wished he had not. "Coincidence?" he said. "Possibly." Elise's tone made the word sound temporary. She suggested a parentage test, not because a resemblance proved anything, but because Tess's unidentified chip and Hearthlight collar made every unusual connection worth documenting. Caleb objected twice. The first objection concerned cost. Elise reminded him that Naomi Greer's Regional Working Dog Health Fund would cover unexplained breeding cases if certain criteria were met. Caleb had not yet met Naomi, but he already disliked having his decisions supported by people he did not know. His second objection was less practical. "Flint has never been bred." Elise looked at him. "Not while he has lived with you." The distinction settled heavily between them. Caleb agreed to the test. Elise collected a cheek swab from Tess and another from Flint. Tess treated the process as an insult. Flint accepted it with the tired dignity of someone who had survived military veterinary examinations and expected little from civilization. For the next 8 days, nothing happened. Caleb repaired a church boiler, replaced a fuel pump at an isolated farmhouse, and told himself he had resumed work because the weather had improved. He avoided the old delivery map in his kitchen. Tess discovered that wool socks were easier to steal than leather gloves and began building a collection beneath the dining table. Flint watched her do it. He did not intervene. Caleb suspected mentorship. The laboratory report arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Elise did not read the result over the phone. She asked Caleb to come to the clinic. That alone told him enough to make the drive unpleasant. The waiting room was empty when he arrived. Flint walked beside him, while Tess pulled forward on her leash with the confidence of a dog who had already forgotten being afraid of the building. Elise waited in her office with a printed report. "The probability is above 99%, she said. Caleb remained standing. "Say it plainly." "Flint is Tess's biological father." The office radiator clicked. Outside, a snowplow moved slowly through the square, pushing a ridge of gray slush toward the curb. Tess climbed onto Flint's front paw and tried to chew the end of his leash. Flint lifted the paw and placed it somewhere else. Caleb looked from the report to the dogs. He had imagined that such news, if it ever came, would feel strange but somehow joyful. A continuation. A piece of Flint that would remain after age took what it always took. Instead, Caleb felt something colder. Violation did not require visible injury. Sometimes it was the discovery that a decision had been made inside your life without your knowledge. Flint had served beside him. Flint had been wounded, retired, and finally allowed to belong to no institution. Yet somewhere, something taken from him had remained in storage, waiting for another person to decide what it was worth. "I want another test," Caleb said. Elise nodded. "I already prepared the samples." He looked at her. "You expected me to ask?" "I expected you not to trust a result you did not want." A second laboratory in Massachusetts received fresh samples under different identification numbers. Elise documented the collection on video, sealed the package in front of Caleb, and used an independent courier. The second result arrived 5 days later. It agreed with the first. There was no reasonable doubt. Tess was Flint's daughter. That evening, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with both reports beside the white hearthlight collar. The lamp symbol faced upward. Flint lay near the wood stove, while Tess attempted to pull one of Caleb's gloves from beneath his head. The old dog had stolen it earlier and was now defending possession through complete immobility. Tess planted all 4 feet and pulled backward. Flint did not move. She growled with the voice of an animal no larger than a winter boot. Caleb watched them. The reports called them sire and offspring. The words seemed too clean, too orderly. They suggested a planned connection, a line on a chart, a relationship created for record-keeping. Flint had never asked for an heir. Tess had never asked to become one. The next morning, Caleb brought a locked military records box down from the attic. He had not opened it since leaving active service. Inside were deployment orders, veterinary evaluations, retirement forms, and a medical consent packet from a working dog research program. The program had operated through a private laboratory, contracted to study inherited orthopedic conditions and reproductive health. Elise sat across from him at the clinic conference table as they worked through the pages. Most were painfully ordinary. Blood panels, hip images, family history questionnaires. Then Elise found a reproductive storage consent. A sample had been collected from Flint after he qualified for a study on fertility and hereditary disease markers. The form permitted evaluation, preservation, and laboratory testing. A separate paragraph appeared in bold. No sample may be used for insemination, embryo creation, commercial breeding, or transfer to a third party without renewed written consent from the legal custodian. Caleb read the sentence 3 times. His signature appeared at the bottom. There was no later authorization. Elise traced the laboratory's history through state business records. It had closed 4 years earlier after losing several government contracts. Its equipment, stored biological material, and remaining accounts had been sold during bankruptcy proceedings. The assets passed through two companies Caleb had never heard of. The final purchaser was a subsidiary whose registered address matched Hearthlight's administrative building. The connection was strong enough to be alarming. It was not yet strong enough to prove a crime. That was the first thing Diane Bellamy told them. Diane served on the Bellwether Town Council, though most residents still introduced her as the former county attorney. She was 61, with short silver hair, dark eyes, and the patient posture of someone willing to let another person finish making a weak argument before dismantling it. She met Caleb and Elise in a rear room of the public library. A copy of the town charter lay open in front of her, surrounded by sharpened yellow pencils and narrow paper flags. "Parentage proves Flint contributed genetic material," Diane said. "The consent form proves the original use was restricted. The bankruptcy record suggests Hearthlight acquired access to stored samples." "Suggests?" Caleb asked. "Yes. They bought the storage inventory. We do not yet know whether Flint's sample was included, whether Hearthlight knowingly received it, or who authorized its use. No one authorized it. You know that. A court requires a documented chain." Caleb leaned back. He disliked Diane's caution because it was reasonable. Diane removed her reading glasses. "If you accuse Hearthlight publicly before we can establish the transfer records, Meredith Van will call this a clerical dispute. Crowell will call it an attack on Bellwether's largest employer. Both will ask why a retired Navy SEAL is making allegations based on a puppy that resembles his dog." "She does more than resemble him." "I agree. Agreement is not evidence." Diane contacted Corinne Hale, an investigator with Vermont's Animal Health and Consumer Protection Division. Corinne arrived 2 days later in a dark blue state vehicle without official markings. She was 50, compact, and spare in her movements, with short dark hair threaded with silver and a narrow leather bag worn across her coat. She did not spend time admiring Flint or asking how Tess had been found. She read every report, every consent page, every transfer filing. When she finished, she arranged 4 colored tabs along the edge of the file. "We need the original consent from the government archive," she said. "Not only Caleb's copy. We need the complete bankruptcy inventory, the serial batch for Tess's chip, and the reproductive records identifying the dam." "The mother," Caleb said. "Yes." Corinne glanced at Tess, who had fallen asleep beneath the library table with her nose against Flint's tail. "Parentage requires 2 lines." The search for the second line led to New Hampshire. A health screening database showed that Hearthlight had once processed reproductive samples for a German shepherd named Lark. Lark belonged to Naomi Greer, who operated a small search and rescue training facility outside Littleton. Naomi did not answer the first phone call. She answered the second with suspicion. By the third, Corinne had explained enough for her to agree to a test. Lark's sample confirmed the rest. She was Tess's biological mother. Naomi arrived in Bellwether on a clear, bitter afternoon. She stepped from an old red pickup wearing a pine green parka, gray field pants, and a bright orange knit cap. Her black hair, streaked with silver, hung in a loose braid over one shoulder. Lark remained in the truck. "She is 13, Naomi explained. "Long drives are enough excitement." Naomi carried a waterproof folder containing Lark's veterinary history. Years earlier, she had submitted a reproductive sample to a clinic affiliated with Hearthlight for genetic screening before a planned breeding. The planned breeding had never occurred. Naomi had never authorized embryo creation. She knelt several feet from Tess, but did not call the puppy or reach out. Tess studied her. Then she approached, sniffed Naomi's fingers, and returned to Flint's side. Naomi did not appear hurt. "A dog does not owe recognition to paperwork," she said. Caleb looked at her. Naomi rose slowly. "People like pedigrees because they make relationships look tidy. Dogs are rarely consulted." Her records gave Corinne the missing maternal chain. They also supplied an internal sample number. That number appeared in a private Hearthlight catalog Naomi had received anonymously months earlier and dismissed as expensive marketing. The catalog offered a program called Legacy Guardian Lines. Its language promised descendants of military working dogs, law enforcement K9S, and proven search and rescue animals. No individual dogs were named. Buyers were invited to apply for private placement and were warned that prices reflected preserved service traits and restricted bloodline access. One entry described a 6-puppy litter produced from a retired military explosives dog and a winter search female. Tess's age matched. So did her coat, sex, and chip batch. The asking price was higher than Caleb had paid for his first truck. He felt anger return, but it no longer moved in the same direction. At first, he had thought of Tess as something taken from Flint. Now he saw the second danger. Everyone was defining her through what came before her: military lineage, search history, premium traits, legacy. Even the investigation needed Tess to be evidence. Across the room, she had finally won the glove from Flint. She ran 2 triumphant circles around the clinic table, tripped over the fingers, and landed against Naomi's boot. Flint rose, retrieved the glove, and walked away. Tess followed, deeply offended. No title in the Hearthlight catalog could explain either of them. Caleb folded the page closed. "Tess is not Flint's continuation," he said. No one answered immediately. Elise understood first. Caleb rested his hands on the table. "She does not owe anyone the same work. She does not owe the military, Hearthlight, me, or whatever person paid for this litter." Corinne watched him carefully. "What do you want to do?" The answer had changed. Caleb no longer wanted only to prove that someone had taken something from Flint. He wanted to prevent Hearthlight from deciding what Tess and the other 5 puppies were allowed to become. "Find the whole litter," he said, "then find every sample they used." Tess reached Flint's bed and dropped the glove on top of it like an offering. Flint stared at the glove, then at Tess. He lowered himself beside it. For the first time since she entered Caleb's house, he allowed her to lie close without shifting away. Caleb looked at the 2 dogs, one carrying a history others wanted to sell, and the other carrying expectations she did not understand. Blood could explain where a life began. It did not have the right to decide what that life was for. By the end of the week, Bellwether had divided Caleb Rourke into 2 different men. To some, he was the retired Navy SEAL who had uncovered something no one else had been willing to examine. People stopped him outside the hardware store, lowered their voices, and thanked him for protecting Flint and Tess. To others, he was the man threatening 40 local jobs in the coldest part of winter. Those people did not lower their voices. At the Morning Bell Cafe, conversations shortened whenever Caleb entered. A waitress who had known his wife for 15 years still refilled his coffee, but she no longer stopped to ask how Flint's joints were doing. Near the front window, 2 Hearthlight maintenance workers sat over plates of eggs and fried potatoes. One of them looked toward Caleb, then quickly returned to his meal. The other did not look away. "My sister works in their rehabilitation wing," he said. "You planning to pay her mortgage when they close?" Caleb set his coffee on the counter. "No one has ordered Hearthlight closed." "Not yet." The man was perhaps 35, with sawdust caught in the cuff of his work jacket and the tired face of someone who had already been awake for several hours. "They employ my sister, my cousin, and half the crew that used to work at the mill," he continued. Maybe somebody filled out the wrong form. That doesn't make the whole place rotten. Caleb could have answered sharply. He could have explained the 2 DNA tests, the restricted consent form, the false catalog, and the samples that had crossed state lines without permission. Instead, he looked at the man's hands. There was a wedding ring on one finger and a burn mark across the thumb. The hands of someone who repaired things, fed people, and probably counted every heating bill before opening it. "I hope the whole place isn't rotten," Caleb said. It was the truth, and that seemed to unsettle the man more than anger would have. Hearthlight Canine Initiative stood on the northern edge of Bellwether, where an old dairy complex had been rebuilt in pale stone and cedar. Its roofs were steep enough to shed snow. Heated walkways connected the veterinary wing, rehabilitation pool, training hall, and boarding lodges. There were no rusted cages, no frightened animals pressed against dirty fencing. Through the front windows, Caleb could see a Labrador learning to walk again in a support harness, while 2 technicians encouraged him with pieces of food. In another room, a woman in scrubs massaged the scarred leg of a retired police dog. Most of the people working there appeared to care deeply about the animals in front of them. That made the hidden breeding program more difficult to hold in the mind. Wrongdoing was easier when it looked ugly. Hearthlight looked like a place where healing occurred. Dr. Meredith Van requested the meeting with Caleb herself. She chose a cafe across from the town hall rather than her office, perhaps because neutral ground made the invitation seem less official. The place was narrow and bright, with polished wooden tables and old photographs of Bellwether's maple harvests lining the walls. Meredith was already seated when Caleb arrived. At 49, she carried herself with the quiet precision of someone accustomed to being listened to. Her platinum blonde hair, lightly threaded with gray, was cut in an asymmetrical bob that remained perfectly arranged despite the winter wind. She wore a long camel-colored coat over a black turtleneck, with a silver-patterned scarf folded neatly at her throat. A fountain pen lay parallel to a closed leather folder. Caleb noticed such arrangements. Order could reveal as much as disorder. Meredith gestured toward the chair opposite her. "I appreciate you coming. I haven't decided that I came for you." "No, I assumed you came for Flint." The server brought coffee. Meredith waited until the woman had moved away. "I know what the tests show," she said. Caleb did not touch his cup. "Then you know Flint's sample was used without my permission. I know your copy of the original consent did not include commercial breeding. That is a careful sentence. I prefer accurate ones." Meredith opened the folder. Inside were health summaries, orthopedic scores, and reproductive assessments. She turned the document so Caleb could read them. The names had been replaced by identification codes. "This program produced healthy dogs," she said. "No severe hip dysplasia, no congenital cardiac defects, strong temperaments, excellent recovery from environmental stress." "You are describing products." "I am describing outcomes. You created them from animals you did not own." Meredith folded her hands. "The material entered Hearthlight's legal custody through a bankruptcy transfer. Custody is not permission. That distinction is being reviewed by lawyers you pay." A faint movement touched the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. "Mr. Rourke, hundreds of remarkable working dogs disappear from breeding populations every year. They retire, die, or are sterilized before their best traits can be preserved. Institutional caution has become waste. Flint is not waste." "I did not say he was." "You said what belongs to him was being wasted." For the first time, Meredith glanced toward the window. Across the street, municipal workers were clearing snow from the steps of the town hall. A Hearthlight van passed behind them, carrying the lamp emblem on its side. "Flint protected people," she said. "He served with distinction. Why should those traits end with him?" because his service did not make his body public property. We preserve the bloodlines of exceptional horses, guide dogs, detection dogs, and livestock guardians. Society accepts that because the value is obvious. Those programs require permission. Permission is rarely as simple as people imagine. Custodians die, organizations dissolve, contracts contradict one another. Biological value does not wait patiently while human grief resolves itself. Caleb went still. Meredith had spoken gently, but the sentence reached for something personal. You think this is about my grief? I think grief makes people protective of symbols. Flint is not a symbol. No, but you are treating genetic material as though using it changes something about the life he has with you. Caleb leaned forward. It changes who was allowed to make the decision. Meredith's fingers moved to the silver pen. She tapped its cap once against her thumbnail, a small imperfection in an otherwise controlled woman. The puppies are healthy, she said. They were not mistreated. They were placed with screened clients who could provide excellent homes. Placed or sold? Those are not mutually exclusive. How much was Tess worth? Meredith did not answer. That silence gave Caleb more than a number would have. He stood. Who decided Flint had to keep serving after he retired? Meredith looked up at him without anger. Science cannot wait for every custodian to overcome the fear of losing what they love. Caleb held her gaze. The sentence was cruel, but not careless. Meredith believed it. She did not think she had stolen anything. She believed expertise had granted her the right to rescue value from ordinary people and their inconvenient emotions. Caleb left the cafe understanding something that made the problem larger. Meredith Van would not be frightened into confessing. She would defend the program as progress. Mayor Everett Crowell received Caleb in the municipal heating room beneath the town hall. The location was deliberate. 2 aging boilers filled most of the basement, their pipes knocking and sighing above the concrete floor. Crowell stood beside a maintenance panel with his suit jacket folded over a chair and his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was 55, broad through the middle, with neatly combed gray hair and the ruddy complexion of a man who shook hands outdoors in every season. A small brass maple leaf remained pinned to his vest even in the basement. These boilers were supposed to be replaced 6 years ago, Crowell said. He struck one pipe lightly with his knuckles. Hearthlight paid for the new circulation pumps. They also covered emergency heating assistance for 63 homes last winter. Caleb leaned against the workbench. You invited me down here to show me the price of silence? I invited you because you repair heating systems. You understand that principles do not keep pipes from freezing. Neither do lies. They only delay the burst. Crowell's expression tightened. Unlike Meredith, the mayor did not possess complete control over his face. Concern, irritation, and exhaustion moved openly through it. Bellwether lost the timber mill, he said. Then the regional clinic reduced hours. Young families left because there was nowhere to work. Hearthlight arrived when we were deciding whether to close the community hall for winter. So you gave them access to residence information. Crowell did not deny it. The Winter Home Assistance Program collected voluntary details from elderly residents, veterans, and people with limited mobility. The forms included heating needs, medication deliveries, pets in the home, special food requirements, and whether an animal had been trained for service or military work. Hearthlight had originally received access to coordinate veterinary assistance. Crowell allowed them to use the same information to identify dogs with commercially valuable histories. They offered free screening, he said, joint exams, genetic testing, food deliveries. People received services they could not afford. And Hearthlight received a catalog. You are reducing a complicated agreement to its worst interpretation. You gave private information to a breeder. I gave a respected veterinary organization permission to contact residents who might benefit from its programs. Did those residents know their dogs were being evaluated for reproductive value? Crowell looked toward the boilers. The answer lived in the direction of his eyes. Caleb felt anger rise, but underneath it came something less satisfying. Understanding. Crowell had probably not begun with a grand conspiracy. He had approved one expanded use of data, then another. He had ignored a report because Hearthlight had just funded the community roof. He had delayed a question because payroll was due Friday. Compromise had entered through a door marked emergency and gradually taken over the building. What happens if Hearthlight closes? Crowell asked. People who committed no crime could lose their jobs. 42 employees, more if you count local suppliers. The pharmacy contracts with their shuttle. The bakery provides food for their conferences. The old motel survives on visiting clients. That does not make the breeding program legal. No, it makes the consequences real. Crowell picked up his jacket. You had a career where the enemy wore a different uniform. Municipal government does not offer that luxury. Caleb pushed away from the bench. I know what you are doing. I am keeping the heat on. You are calling the people who trusted you an acceptable cost. Crowell's face hardened. And you are asking an entire town to risk its future because someone used a sample from a dog that is alive, healthy, and living comfortably in your home. Caleb took one step forward, then stopped. The old instinct was to make the room smaller, to reduce Crowell's arguments until only guilt remained. But the mayor was not entirely wrong about the consequences. That was the burden of it. A clean decision would have required innocent people on only one side. That evening, Elise's clinic remained open after regular hours. Diane had invited several veterans and professional dog handlers whose records appeared in Hearthlight-affiliated screening programs. Corinne requested copies of consent forms, medical agreements, and any promotional material they had received. At first, the gathering felt like a tax appointment. People arrived carrying folders, signed the evidence log, and positioned themselves near the door. Most did not want to speak. They had come to provide documents, not pieces of themselves. Flint moved through the room slowly. He stopped beside a retired Air Force technician named Marjorie Wells, who sat with both hands wrapped around a paper cup. Flint lowered himself near her boots. Marjorie looked down. My dog used to do that, she said. No one answered immediately. He was a Malinois named Cooper. Wouldn't sleep unless one paw touched my foot. Her voice remained steady. After he died, Hearthlight asked permission to include his medical history in a working dog longevity study. I said yes. She opened her folder. 6 months later, I found a private advertisement for puppies described as carrying the temperament of a decorated military detection line. One of the photographs showed Cooper's registration code on a whiteboard in the background. Across the room, a former paramedic shifted forward. His retired search dog had also been screened. Then Naomi spoke about Lark. During a winter search 8 years earlier, Lark had found an injured hiker beneath a stand of fallen spruce. Rescue crews could not reach them until morning. Lark had remained beside the man through the night, sharing warmth and barking whenever he began to lose consciousness. Hearthlight used that story, Naomi said. They changed the location and removed Lark's name, but they used it to sell the litter. A woman near the window wiped her eyes, angry with herself for doing so. They did that with my husband's dog, she said. Called him a legacy guardian. He was not a legacy. He was Murphy. He hated rain and stole cheese from the refrigerator. A few people laughed. Not because the situation was funny, because Murphy suddenly existed in the room as a dog rather than a claim. The conversation changed after that. Folders remained important, but the people began telling the stories attached to them. a dog who had helped a veteran enter a crowded grocery store, a shepherd who woke her owner before nighttime seizures, a Labrador who refused to retrieve anything except yellow tennis balls and once presented a church minister with a frozen fish. Tess followed Flint from chair to chair. She attempted to sit neatly beside each person as he did, but misjudged the distance and lowered herself onto Marjorie's boot. Later, she settled on a stack of photocopies and had to be removed before becoming part of the evidence record. For the first time all day, Caleb smiled without effort. Then he understood why Crowell and Meredith were dangerous in different ways. Meredith converted living traits into biological value. Crowell converted private trust into public funding. Both depended on people believing their stories were too small to matter on their own. Caleb looked around the clinic. If he stood alone, Crowell could describe him as a grieving veteran protecting his dog from scientific progress. Meredith could frame the case as an emotional misunderstanding over consent. But Hearthlight had not taken one story. It had taken dozens, removed the names, polished away the inconvenient details, and sold the remains as heritage. Caleb rose from the wall. "Corinne needs the documents," he said, "but the town needs to hear what those documents mean." Marjorie studied him. "You want us to go public?" "I want it to be your choice." No one answered at once. That mattered. Caleb had spent years assuming leadership meant deciding first and carrying the cost alone. Now he waited while each person considered what speaking might cost them. One by one, they agreed to provide sworn statements. Not everyone promised to speak publicly. Not everyone forgave Caleb for the danger to local jobs. But no one left believing the matter belonged only to him. Near the end of the meeting, Flint returned to Caleb's side. Tess followed and sat directly on the toe of his boot. Caleb looked down at her. She had been marketed as the continuation of heroic blood. At that moment she was chewing his shoelace. It seemed a healthier ambition. Outside, snow began falling over Bellwether's warm windows, the community hall, and Hearthlight's carefully lit buildings. The town had survived the winter by accepting a lie it did not fully understand. Exposing that lie would not leave everyone unharmed. But Caleb finally understood that truth did not become fair simply because one man carried it alone. It became harder to dismiss when every stolen story reclaimed its own name. Lenora Bass arrived at Carver Veterinary Clinic after closing, carrying no documents. That was the first thing Corinne Hale noticed. The second was that Lenora kept both hands inside the pockets of her gray wool coat, even after Elise locked the front door behind her. Outside, snow drifted gently across Bellwether's square. The street lamps cast yellow circles on the pavement, and the buildings beyond the clinic windows appeared softened at their edges. Nothing in the town looked urgent. Inside, everyone had been waiting for nearly an hour. Caleb stood beside the examination counter in his brown canvas coat, the olive drab shirt visible beneath it. Flint rested near his boots. Tess slept in a padded basket several feet away, one black-tipped paw hanging over the side. Diane Bellamy sat at a small table with a legal pad and two sharpened pencils placed neatly in front of her. Corinne occupied the chair opposite, her leather crossbody bag at her feet and a small recorder resting beside her closed hand. Elise offered Lenora tea. Lenora shook her head. She was 57, slight enough that the heavy coat seemed to carry her rather than the other way around. Her ash-blonde hair had been cut into a tidy bob, but several strands clung damply to her cheeks. Large tortoise-shell glasses magnified the exhaustion around her gray-blue eyes. Caleb recognized the coat before he recognized the woman. Celia Boone had described it. Long, gray, narrow at the shoulders. "You were at House 48, he said. Lenora looked toward Tess. "Yes." The word barely crossed the room. Flint lifted his head. Tess continued sleeping. Corinne did not turn on the recorder. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to know whether you came voluntarily." Lenora nodded. "Has anyone threatened you, directed you to come here, or promised you protection?" "No." "Are you carrying Hearthlight records?" Lenora removed her hands from her coat. They were empty. "No." Caleb's disappointment arrived too quickly to hide. Lenora saw it. "I could not take them," she said. "Every access point is logged now. Meredith changed the permissions after the first anonymous complaint." "Then what did you bring?" Caleb asked. "My memory." Diane's pencil remained still. "Memory can become testimony," she said, "but only if we establish what you personally saw, what you were told, and what you are assuming. Those are three different things." Lenora sat. Her gloves were dark red, the color of old wine. She removed them one finger at a time and placed them precisely beside each other on the table. Then she began with Hearthlight's first year. She had joined as a bookkeeper when the organization still occupied only the renovated dairy clinic and one rehabilitation building. Meredith Van had spoken about preserving the health of working dogs, reducing hereditary disease, and using private placements to fund treatment for animals whose owners could not afford it. Lenora had believed her. So had most of the staff. At first, the breeding program looked legitimate, Lenora said. Privately owned dogs, written permissions, standard veterinary contracts. "When did that change?" Corinne asked. Lenora pressed her fingertips together. "Not all at once." The answer sounded like something she had repeated to herself for years. A storage laboratory failed. Hearthlight purchased its remaining equipment and biological inventory through a subsidiary called North County Veterinary Assets. Some of the sample records were incomplete. Others were coded under institutional contracts. Meredith initially described them as materials awaiting legal review. Then the invoices began. Small transfers appeared from companies with names unrelated to animals, consulting firms, family offices, private wellness foundations. The payments were marked as research donations, but matched the dates of embryo transfers, veterinary travel, and confidential puppy placements. Lenora asked questions. The answers were always almost sufficient. A revised policy was coming. A lawyer had approved the language. The original custodian could not be located. The material would otherwise be destroyed. Each explanation solved one line on a spreadsheet, Lenora said. I did not look at what the lines became when placed together. Caleb glanced at Tess. The puppy shifted in her sleep, curling more tightly against the blanket. "When did you know?" he asked. Lenora looked at him through the large lenses. 2 years ago. The clinic seemed colder. She had discovered 2 versions of the same consent form. The first permitted health screening and long-term storage. The second included an additional page authorizing reproductive use and commercial transfer. The added page had been scanned months after the original signature. "Whose form?" Diane asked. "I do not remember the owner's name. The file used an identification code." "Do you remember the code?" Lenora recited it without hesitation. Corinne finally turned on the recorder. Once Lenora began giving numbers, she changed. Her shoulders remained narrow, her voice quiet, but uncertainty gave way to the precision of a woman who had spent decades balancing accounts to the cent. She remembered invoice prefixes, storage fees, wire transfer dates, and the names of shell companies because numbers had always felt safer than motives. One company paid Hearthlight for behavioral preservation services. Another purchased genetic continuity options. A private placement agency collected fees from buyers. On paper, no single company bred and sold the dogs. Together, they formed a machine designed so that each part could deny seeing the whole. Tess's litter was marked HGL6, Lenora said. Caleb looked at Corinne. 6 puppies? Yes. Where are the others? I do not know their current locations. The answer landed harder than Lenora's confession. Corinne leaned forward. What do you know? 5 puppies had already been assigned new commercial identifiers. Their records no longer referenced Flint or Lark. The system listed 2 Hearthlight-owned German Shepherds as the official parents. Tess had been scheduled to receive the same change, but the database migration failed to update one field. Her chip remained connected to the original reproductive file. She was the only puppy who could still be traced directly, Lenora said, not through inference, through the source codes. And you removed her, Elise said. Lenora nodded. A private presentation had been scheduled for the following afternoon. Potential buyers would meet the litter in small groups, accompanied by veterinary consultants and placement coordinators. The puppies would not be auctioned openly. Hearthlight avoided language that sounded commercial. Buyers paid program contributions. The higher the claimed service history of the bloodline, the larger the contribution. How much for Tess? Caleb asked. Lenora gave the figure. No one spoke for several seconds. The amount was nearly equal to what some bellwether families earned in a year. Caleb looked at the puppy sleeping beneath a blanket Elise had bought at a farm supply store. Tess had spent the morning chasing dust under his workbench and had needed rescuing from a paper grocery bag she entered voluntarily. Someone had placed a price on her before she had learned to climb stairs. Why Mailbox 48? Corinne asked. Lenora's eyes moved toward Caleb. Because of Anna. Caleb's expression changed. His wife's name had not been spoken in the room until then. Lenora had known Anna Rourke through the old winter delivery network. During Hearthlight's early years, Anna helped coordinate fuel vouchers, dog food, and medication deliveries for isolated residents. Lenora managed reimbursement forms from the organization's side. They were not close friends. But Anna had once told her something about Caleb. She said you could complain for 20 miles and still be the first person out of the truck when someone needed help. A small, painful warmth moved through Caleb's chest. That sounded like Anna. After she died, I saw you on the old postal road, Lenora continued. Same time most mornings. Flint always with you. You watched us? Not regularly. I live beyond the East Ridge. Our routes overlap. You expected Flint to recognize Tess? No. Lenora's answer came firmly for the first time. I expected you to see a vulnerable animal before you saw its value. The room became quiet again. Lenora had not chosen Caleb because he was a former Navy SEAL. She had not expected him to solve a conspiracy or confront a powerful organization. She had chosen him because Anna once believed that when the decision was small and immediate, Caleb protected life before asking whether it was convenient. That faith felt heavier than suspicion. Lenora took a peppermint from her coat pocket but did not unwrap it. I had 15 minutes, she said. I knew your route. I used warming pads from the veterinary supply room. I drilled the vents the night before. I stayed at the bus shelter until you opened the box. Why didn't you approach me? Because Hearthlight Security had already questioned staff. If anyone saw us speak, you would become part of the problem before Tess was safe. You made me part of it anyway. Yes. Lenora lowered her eyes. I am sorry. Caleb wanted to be angry with her. Instead, he found himself thinking of 5 other puppies carrying false names toward unknown homes. Corinne asked Lenora what would happen next. The answer expanded the timeline. Within 10 days, the remaining puppies were scheduled to leave Vermont under their new pedigrees. 12 frozen reproductive samples would be transferred to a private storage company in Connecticut. Hearthlight's old database would be converted into a new system, replacing original sample identifiers with commercial project numbers. At the same time, The Bellwether Council was preparing to vote on two measures: a public guarantee for Hearthlight's expansion loan and a 20-year lease of municipal land adjoining the rehabilitation complex. Once approved, both agreements would make the town financially dependent on Hearthlight for decades. "They are not destroying the records," Lenora said. "They are separating them." Diane understood first. One file in Vermont, one payment processor in Delaware, one storage company in Connecticut, one placement agency somewhere else. Lenora nodded. No single warrant would show the whole program. Corinne turned off the recorder. "We need an emergency preservation order covering the animals, samples, databases, and financial records." "How long?" Caleb asked. "If Lenora signs a sworn statement tonight, and we obtain supporting records tomorrow, I can request temporary restrictions before the council vote." "Request?" "Yes. And while you request, the puppies can move." "Not if the order is granted." Caleb looked towards the clinic windows. Across the square, the Hearthlight lamp emblem glowed on a banner advertising the upcoming Winter Lantern Festival. The law was being asked to move carefully. Hearthlight had spent years arranging itself to move quickly. Later that night, after Lenora had signed the first pages of her statement, Caleb returned home with Flint and Tess. He did not sleep. Near midnight, he spread a public site plan of the Hearthlight complex across the kitchen table. He had repaired an exterior generator there the previous winter and remembered the service entrances, loading bays, and maintenance corridor. The biological storage room sat behind the veterinary wing. The records office was connected to an older section of the dairy building. Caleb marked the likely camera positions with a pencil. He told himself he was only thinking. Men often gave preparation harmless names when they did not want to admit they had already chosen. At 1 a.m, headlights crossed the front windows. Elise entered without waiting for Caleb to answer the door. Diane followed behind her carrying a folder beneath one arm. Neither looked surprised by the map. Elise removed her navy parka and placed it over a chair. "What happens after you enter?" she asked. "I photograph the records." "And if the doors are locked?" "I solve that." Diane looked at the pencil marks. "And when Hearthlight reports a retired Navy SEAL trespassing in a veterinary facility connected to a personal dispute?" "I bring the evidence out." "You bring material whose custody you cannot prove," Diane said. "Meredith claims you planted it. Crowell says you frightened employees. Hearthlight moves every dog for security reasons before Corinne can stop them." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You want me to wait?" "No," Elise said. "We want you to help without destroying what everyone else is building." That struck harder than Diane's legal argument. Caleb looked toward the hearth. Tess slept in a basket near Flint's bed. Flint remained awake, watching the room with his head raised. Outside, tires compressed snow. A dark green Hearthlight vehicle slowed near the end of the driveway. Flint stood. His body moved in front of Tess before Caleb issued a word. Shoulders forward, head low, silent. Caleb crossed the room and placed one hand on Flint's neck. The dog's muscles were rigid beneath the thick fur. The vehicle remained on the road for several seconds. Then it continued past the house. Flint watched the taillights disappear through the trees. Caleb did not tell him to pursue. He did not open the door. "Stay," he said quietly. Flint's tipped ear turned toward him. For a long moment the old dog remained standing. Then he looked back at Caleb and sat. Behind him, Tess climbed from the basket. She moved beside Flint and attempted to copy his position, but one hind leg slid outward on the wooden floor. She corrected herself and sat crookedly against his shoulder. Caleb looked at the map on the table. Flint had been trained to move toward danger. Caleb had spent much of his life believing the same thing made a man useful. But Flint had chosen restraint because Caleb asked him to trust the hand on his neck. Now Caleb had to decide whether he could offer that same trust to Diane, Elise, Corinne, and the people preparing to place their names beside his. He folded the site plan, not because the danger had passed, because entering the building alone would turn everyone else's courage into collateral damage. Diane gathered the pencils from the table. Elise bent to check Flint's leg, more to give Caleb space than because the dog needed examination. Caleb looked toward Tess. 5 other puppies were somewhere beyond his reach. 12 samples waited to be renamed. An entire town was approaching a vote without knowing what it was agreeing to protect. He still wanted to move. Every part of him built for action demanded it. Instead, he picked up the phone and called Corinne. "Tell me what you need for the preservation order," he said. Flint lowered himself beside Tess. The puppy leaned against him, still sitting slightly crooked. For years, Caleb had confused speed with courage. That night, courage looked like a folded map, a closed door, and a man choosing not to become the easiest argument his opponents could use. By late afternoon, Bellwether had dressed itself for celebration. Golden lanterns hung from black iron hooks around the town square. Smaller lights lined the wooden bridge across the frozen creek, their reflections glowing faintly beneath the ice. Shop windows displayed paper stars, evergreen branches, and bowls of battery-powered candles. Snow fell in slow, scattered flakes that melted against coats and settled in the dark hair of people gathering near the town hall. From a distance, Bellwether looked like a place that had never made a dishonest decision. Caleb stood at the edge of the square, with Flint beside him and Tess on a short leash. The puppy had grown steadier on her feet, though she still treated every patch of loose snow as a personal challenge. Flint wore his dark green winter coat and support harness. His steps were careful on the packed sidewalk, but his head remained high. The Winter Lantern Festival had always been Anna's favorite night of the year. She used to say the town looked most honest when everyone carried a light they could not hide behind. Caleb had not attended since her death. Now he crossed the square beneath the same lanterns, carrying a folder of consent forms, DNA reports, financial summaries, and statements from people whose private histories had been converted into advertising language. The town hall doors stood open. Inside, there was not enough room for everyone. Hearthlight employees filled several rows on the left side of the chamber. Caleb recognized technicians from the rehabilitation wing, kitchen staff, drivers, cleaners, and maintenance workers. Many still wore work jackets bearing the lamp emblem. On the right sat veterans, dog handlers, residents enrolled in winter home assistance, and several people who had discovered their animals' records connected to the breeding program. The arrangement was not official. No one had assigned sides. People had chosen them anyway. Diane Bellamy stood near the council table reviewing the speaker list. She wore a gray tweed coat over a rust-colored turtleneck, reading glasses hanging from a thin cord. Colored tabs protruded from the town charter beneath her arm. "You are 5th, she told Caleb. "Who is before me?" Elise, Naomi, Lenora, Corinne. And after? Meredith. Crowell requested the final statement before council questions. Of course he did. He believes endings belong to the person who controls the room. Diane glanced towards the audience. Tonight, that may not be him. The hearing was required because Hearthlight's proposed expansion involved 15 acres of municipal land and a public guarantee on a development loan. Crowell had scheduled the meeting during the festival, assuming most residents would prefer lanterns, cider, and music to a long argument about contracts. He had misjudged the appetite of a town that had spent weeks speaking in lowered voices. Every chair was occupied. People stood along the walls. The council president called the meeting to order. At first, the proceedings sounded ordinary. The clerk read the proposal. A financial advisor described projected jobs, tourism revenue, and veterinary services. Hearthlight's expansion would include a larger rehabilitation pool, a training lodge, conference housing, and new clinical space. The language was polished. Nothing in the proposal mentioned frozen reproductive samples, altered identifiers, or dogs sold through private placement companies. Elise spoke first. She did not accuse anyone of cruelty. She presented the medical facts in the same calm voice she used when explaining an injury to a frightened owner. 2 independent laboratories had confirmed Flint as Tess's biological father. A separate test identified Lark as the mother. Neither legal custodian had authorized reproductive use. Elise held up the original consent document. "This form permits health research and storage," she said. "It specifically prohibits insemination, embryo production, commercial breeding, and third-party transfer without renewed written consent." A Hearthlight employee near the aisle raised her hand. "Are the puppies healthy?" Elise looked toward her. "Yes." "Were they neglected?" "Not according to the information currently available." The woman turned to the people around her, as though that answer settled the question. Elise continued. "Good veterinary care does not replace consent. An animal can be physically healthy while the decisions surrounding its creation and ownership remain dishonest." Naomi followed. She spoke without notes. Lark's sample had been submitted for hereditary disease screening. Naomi had never agreed to breeding, embryo creation, or commercial use. She described the dog not through her certifications, but through details the Hearthlight catalog had never included. Lark hated metal stairs. She refused to work for anyone carrying peppermint candy. She once remained beside an injured hiker through an entire winter night, then stole the rescuer's sandwich when the helicopter arrived. A few people laughed. Naomi waited for the sound to fade. "Hearthlight used that rescue to market a bloodline," she said. "They removed Lark's name and kept the heroism. That is not preservation. It is taking a life apart and selling only the pieces that look impressive." Lenora's hands shook when she approached the microphone. She wore her gray wool coat despite the warmth of the crowded room. Her tortoiseshell glasses reflected the overhead lights. A black folder rested against her chest, but she did not open it. She explained the changing identifiers, the shell companies, the revised consent pages, and the 6-puppy litter coded as HGL-6. She admitted her own part. "I entered transactions I did not fully question," she said. "Later, when I understood what the numbers meant, I told myself I needed stronger proof. Then I told myself speaking would cost innocent people their jobs." Someone behind the Hearthlight rose said, "It still might." Lenora turned toward the voice. "Yes," she said. "That is why I waited too long." The honesty produced no applause. It produced silence. Corinne Hale did not discuss confidential evidence or pending legal conclusions. She confirmed only that her division had found sufficient cause to request temporary preservation of biological samples, databases, transport records, and the remaining puppies. "The request is not a finding of guilt," she said. "It is intended to prevent material evidence from being transferred or altered while ownership and consent are reviewed." Council members asked questions. How many puppies had been placed? Could the samples be moved before an order was granted? Would Hearthlight's legitimate veterinary work be affected? Corinne answered carefully. The law did not move in speeches. It moved through definitions, jurisdiction, and proof. Then Meredith Van approached the podium. She wore a pearl gray suit and carried no visible notes. Her platinum hair remained perfectly arranged. She looked neither defensive nor ashamed. "I will not insult this community by pretending the program did not exist," she began. The room shifted. Meredith described the health screenings, genetic assessments, and carefully selected placements. The puppies were healthy. Buyers were evaluated. No dog had been denied veterinary care. She acknowledged that ownership documents inherited through the laboratory bankruptcy were incomplete. She called that a failure of administration, not morality. Working dogs represent generations of rare temperament, intelligence, and physical ability, she said. When those traits disappear because institutions cannot update outdated consent structures, society loses something irreplaceable. Caleb watched the Hearthlight employees. Some appeared relieved. Meredith was giving them a version of events in which their work remained honorable. The science moved faster than the paperwork, she continued. That gap should be corrected. But destroying a program with demonstrated health outcomes would punish animals, employees, and families for procedural failures. Diane leaned toward Caleb. She knows exactly which word she wants them to remember. Procedural. Diane nodded. Meredith finished without raising her voice. The applause was not overwhelming. It did not need to be. It came from enough people to prove the town remained divided. Everett Crowell took the podium next. He had removed his winter coat. His navy suit fit neatly across his broad shoulders, and the brass maple leaf pin on his lapel caught the light each time he moved. He did something Caleb had not expected. He admitted part of the truth. Crowell acknowledged that Hearthlight had been permitted to use information from the Winter Home Assistance Program beyond its original purpose. He admitted delaying a facility review after questions arose about data handling. He also confirmed that municipal funds had paid for legal advice connected to Hearthlight's expansion. The chamber erupted. The council president struck the gavel. Crowell waited. When the room quieted, he began naming what Hearthlight had funded. 42 direct jobs. Heating support for 63 homes. Repairs to the community hall roof. Transportation to medical appointments, contracts with the pharmacy, motel, bakery, and local builders. Those facts do not erase mistakes, he said, but neither do the mistakes erase those facts. He looked directly at Caleb. Are we prepared to risk all of that over a dispute concerning the permitted use of stored biological material? The question sounded smaller than the truth. That was its power. Caleb had heard men reduce suffering to acceptable loss, collateral effect, or necessary cost. The language changed depending on the room. The purpose remained the same. Make the harmed things sound technical. Make the benefited things sound human. When Caleb's name was called, Flint rose. The old dog hesitated at the central aisle. Too many feet, too many voices, too little space. Caleb did not pull the leash. Tess stepped forward first, weaving past a chair and nearly tangling herself around Diane's boots. Flint watched her, then followed. The three of them reached the front together. Caleb placed no military record on the podium. He spoke about mornings. Thousands of them. Flint waking him before sunrise. Flint waiting by the door when Caleb had no reason to leave the house. Flint standing beside him after deployments, after retirement, and after Anna's death. People like stories about one brave act, Caleb said. They are easier to sell. But Flint did not save me once. He kept asking me to live, morning after morning, when nobody was watching. Flint lowered himself beside the podium. Tess sat against his shoulder, slightly crooked. Caleb spoke of Anna and the winter roots she had maintained. She believed a town's character could be measured by how many doors it was willing to knock on when someone stopped appearing in public. Then he looked toward Meredith. Tess is not Flint's legacy. The puppy began chewing the end of her leash. A quiet laugh moved through the chamber. She does not owe the Navy a career. She does not owe Hearthlight a sale. She does not owe me the comfort of becoming another version of Flint. Caleb rested one hand on the podium. Loyalty is not stored in a frozen sample. It is given every day. When we take something offered through trust and sell it without permission, we are not preserving loyalty. He looked across both sides of the room. We are learning how to profit from it. Some people applauded. Others remained still. The town did not transform because Caleb had found the right words. Then a woman rose from the hearthlight section. Her name was Ruth Delaney, manager of the primary kennel wing. She was in her mid-40s, with square shoulders, dark hair pulled into a severe braid, and a hearthlight badge still clipped to her sweater. "I was told the codes were being changed because the old database was unreliable," she said. Meredith did not move. Ruth continued. "I was later instructed to remove printed lineage sheets from 3 litters and replace them with new parent identifiers. I asked whether the owners had approved it. Dr. Van told me ownership had been resolved at the administrative level." A second person stood. Graham Pike, president of Bellwether Community Bank, held a copy of the loan analysis. He was a thin man with rimless glasses and the uncomfortable posture of someone unused to speaking without preparation. "The revenue projections submitted for the public guarantee include placement income classified as research contributions," he said. "If those contributions are excluded, Hearthlight does not meet the coverage requirement for the loan." The room grew louder. Then a maintenance technician named Owen Mercer walked toward the clerk's table. Caleb recognized him as the man from the cafe. Owen carried 3 invoices. "I repaired the heating lines in the restricted breeding wing," he said. "The work order was charged to the Veterans Winter Support account." He looked toward Caleb, then toward his sister seated among the Hearthlight employees. "I want the rehabilitation center to stay open, but this was not rehabilitation." The council recessed for 20 minutes. No one went outside to see the lanterns. When the members returned, they voted first on the loan guarantee. 4 against, 3 in favor. The public guarantee failed. The land lease was suspended pending the state investigation. A separate motion created an emergency employment fund for workers affected by any temporary closure of Hearthlight operations. That vote passed unanimously. Minutes later, Corinne's phone vibrated. The state judge had signed the temporary preservation order. Biological samples, animal transfer records, financial databases, and the remaining puppies could not be moved while the investigation proceeded. The order did not make Bellwether's choice for it. It arrived after the town had already chosen. Outside, volunteers lit the lanterns. Golden light traveled across the bridge and around the square. Some people cheered. Others stood beneath the glow calculating mortgages, lost contracts, and uncertain paychecks. Crowell left through a side door. Meredith walked out the front with her head high. Caleb remained on the steps with Flint and Tess. Bellwether had not healed. It had only stopped pretending that every warm window had been paid for honestly. The lanterns did not erase the darkness beneath them. For the first time, they allowed everyone to see it. The investigation did not end when the lanterns were lit. It continued through the last weeks of winter, when snow darkened along the roadsides, and the frozen creek beneath Bellwether began to speak in small cracks. State investigators occupied 2 rooms inside Hearthlight's administrative building. Accountants followed payments through shell companies. Veterinary officers matched sample numbers to consent forms, storage logs, and the dogs whose names had been removed from them. Truth arrived slowly. It came in boxes, sworn statements, bank records, and digital files restored from older systems. There was no single document that explained everything. There were hundreds that could no longer pretend they meant nothing when placed together. Meredith Van was charged with unlawful use of reproductive material, falsification of veterinary records, commercial fraud, and concealing the origin of animals placed through Hearthlight's private program. She did not apologize publicly. Through her attorney, she continued to argue that the dogs had been healthy, the placements responsible, and the laws governing inherited biological material unclear. Her defense sounded much like her speech at the town hall, precise, polished, and built around the belief that good results could excuse decisions made without permission. The court disagreed enough to keep the case moving. The 6 puppies from Tessa's litter were identified through chip records, veterinary photographs, and transport documents. 2 had already gone to families outside Vermont. Investigators did not remove them without warning. Instead, each household received legal notice, veterinary support, and time to establish temporary custody while ownership questions were reviewed. The puppies were given corrected records bearing their true parentage, not because their bloodline defined them, because no one should begin life beneath a name created to hide where they came from. Hearthlight itself was not destroyed. Its rehabilitation wing, clinic, and legitimate service dog programs were placed under the temporary management of a regional nonprofit. Employees who had not participated in the breeding operation kept their positions. Ruth Delaney remained in the kennel wing and helped rebuild its record system. Owen Mercer continued maintaining the heating lines, though he insisted every new work order identify the exact account paying for it. Bellwether lost contracts and revenue. It did not lose everything. That mattered to Caleb. A clean victory would have been easier to tell. The evil organization closed. The good people cheered. Everyone went home certain. Real life was less considerate. Some residents remained angry that Caleb had helped expose the program. Others blamed Crowell. A few blamed Lenora for waiting. Several insisted Meredith had been wrong only in procedure, not purpose. No single conclusion warmed every house. Everett Crowell resigned before the council could remove him. He admitted authorizing the misuse of winter home assistance data, delaying a compliance review, and allowing public funds to pay expenses that should never have belonged to the town. His cooperation helped investigators connect Hearthlight's private companies to the falsified placement records. It also reduced his sentence. Crowell lost his office, his pension benefits were reviewed, and he was barred from holding municipal authority during his probation. The maple leaf pin disappeared from his lapel. Caleb saw him once outside the courthouse. Crowell stood alone beneath a bare tree, looking smaller without the town hall behind him. Caleb felt no triumph. Crowell had not sold Bellwether for personal luxury. He had convinced himself that keeping the lights on excused deciding whose trust could be spent. That did not make him innocent. It made the warning more useful. Lenora Bass accepted her own consequences. The veterinary board's investigators found no evidence that she had created false medical records, but she had processed payments and remained silent after recognizing serious irregularities. She lost her accounting position and agreed to provide testimony, training materials, and financial reconstruction for the case. She was not introduced at public meetings as the brave woman who saved Tess. Lenora preferred it that way. Working with Corinne Hale, she later helped develop a consent tracking program for small veterinary organizations. Every sample required a visible use restriction. Every transfer created a notice to the legal custodian. No page could be added to a scanned agreement without leaving a separate record. It was quiet work. Lenora understood the value of quiet work done before courage became necessary. In early spring, Naomi Greer drove Lark to Bellwether. The old German shepherd stepped carefully from the red pickup, her dark coat silvered around the face, and her movements measured by 13 winters. Tess watched from the clinic porch, body leaning forward with curiosity. Caleb expected nothing miraculous. He was grateful for that. Lark approached, smelled Tess's face, then inspected her shoulders and tail with professional seriousness. Tess remained still for nearly 4 seconds before attempting to climb over Lark's front leg. Lark stepped away. Her attention shifted immediately to Naomi's canvas food bag. Naomi laughed. "That is as much maternal ceremony as you are getting." Tess followed Lark to the bag. Flint followed Tess. Within a minute, all 3 dogs were engaged in a quiet conspiracy against a sealed package of dried liver. There was no instant recognition, no invisible current passing through blood. Only 3 dogs in the spring sunlight, interested in one another to different degrees, and united by theft. Caleb felt something loosen inside him. Tess did not need a legendary reunion to prove where she belonged. She belonged wherever she was known as herself. Flint's acceptance took longer. He tolerated Tess before he welcomed her. He permitted her to drink from his bowl, but sighed while she did it. He allowed her to follow him through the yard, though he occasionally turned around with the expression of a man discovering he had acquired an unpaid apprentice. His bed remained forbidden territory. Then, one rainy morning, Caleb entered the living room and found Flint asleep along the far edge of the cushion. Tess occupied the rest. She lay on her back, paws spread in 4 directions, one rear foot resting against Flint's cheek. Flint opened one eye. Caleb looked at him. Flint closed the eye again, maintaining the official position that nothing unusual had occurred. Age became more visible in him as the snow withdrew. Some mornings, Flint remained on the porch while Caleb prepared for the walk. His left hind leg took longer to settle beneath him. On colder days, he preferred the rug by the stove to the road leading toward the ridge. At first, Caleb waited with the leash in his hand. Then he understood what he was asking. Flint had spent his life moving because someone needed him to move. Retirement should include the right to stay. Caleb began taking shorter walks when Flint joined him. When the old dog remained home, Caleb left without turning it into a test of loyalty. Tess was offered several training opportunities. A veterans organization suggested making her an ambassador for informed consent. A working dog group offered to evaluate her for detection work. One journalist wanted photographs of the puppy who exposed Hearthlight. Caleb declined them all. Tess learned ordinary things. She learned to wait before crossing the road, though patience remained an insult to her personality. She learned not to chew electrical cords. She learned that ringing the disconnected doorbell button with her nose produced no reward. She did not learn to stop digging holes in the snow. She did not learn that the center of the hallway was an inconvenient place to sleep upside down. She did not become Flint. That was the point. By summer, Bellwether's financial damage had become impossible to ignore. The community hall reduced its hours. Several businesses lost Hearthlight contracts. The town created a relief fund, but money alone could not replace the services people had allowed one organization to control. One evening, Caleb stood in his kitchen while rain tapped against the windows. Anna's route map still hung on the wall. Red lines crossed the hills around Bellwether. Blue circles marked homes requiring medicine. Small black paw prints indicated dogs needing food deliveries or veterinary checks. For 2 years, Caleb had passed the map without touching it. He had told himself leaving it there honored Anna. In truth, it had become a sealed door. Flint rested near the stove. Tess slept across the doorway, successfully blocking both rooms at once. Caleb reached up. The pins resisted before releasing from the wall. He carried the map to the table and spread it beneath the kitchen light. The paper held Anna's handwriting. Mr. Hale, insulin, Tuesday. Mrs. Fulton, check furnace vent. Frank's dog will pretend he has not eaten. Do not believe him. Caleb laughed once. The sound surprised him. Flint raised his head. Caleb traced one of the red routes with his finger. It climbed toward 3 homes above the county plow line. "One road," he said. Flint watched him. "We start with one." The next morning, Caleb called Celia Boone. Then Elise. Then Diane. Within a week, 6 people sat around the kitchen table. Naomi joined by telephone. Corinne reviewed the consent language for the animal care portion. Former Hearthlight drivers offered vehicles. Veterans who had spent years avoiding crowded rooms volunteered for routes that required only one partner and a long road. They named the program the Winter Route Network. No one claimed it would save Bellwether. It promised smaller things. Medicine delivered before a storm. Dog food carried up frozen steps. A generator repaired before the temperature fell. A person knocking twice when an isolated resident failed to answer the first time. Elise organized free microchip registration days and reviewed veterinary consent forms. Diane held workshops explaining data ownership in language no one needed a law degree to understand. Lenora built a record system in which every resident could see exactly who accessed their information and why. Caleb took the high routes. Flint rode in the passenger seat when his joints allowed. Tess stayed in the back, secured by a harness and deeply offended by the seating arrangement. She repeatedly attempted to push her head between the front seats. "This is not a protest movement," Caleb told her. Flint looked out the window. Tess placed one paw on the center console. Her campaign continued. A year after Caleb found her, winter returned to Bellwether. The morning was bright and still, with new snow resting cleanly on the postal road. Caleb stopped the truck beside House 48. The parcel box had been repaired and painted dark blue. Inside were no blankets, warming pads, or frightened puppies. There were cards. Dozens of them. People along the Winter Route Network had left notes of thanks. Some were carefully written. Others contained only a name and a few uneven words. Caleb opened one from a retired mechanic living above the North Ridge. "Thank you for bringing food for Ranger when the road closed. I had enough for myself. I was scared he would not. You treated both of us like we mattered." Caleb read it aloud. Flint sat beside him in the snow, muzzle whiter than it had been the year before. Tess ran a wide circle around the parcel box, returned at full speed, and pushed herself between Caleb and Flint. Flint shifted just enough to make room. On the drive home, Caleb turned toward town instead of taking the road to his house. He stopped at Elise's clinic with 2 coffees and a box of pastries. Before the truck fully stopped, Flint removed one pastry through a gap Caleb had failed to secure. Tess watched carefully. Flint swallowed with the calm efficiency of an experienced professional. "Do not teach her that," Caleb said. Flint licked sugar from his muzzle. The lesson had already been delivered. That evening, Caleb hung the truck keys beside the front door. Anna's gray scarf remained on its old hook. He did not move it. Beside it now hung Tess's collar, Flint's winter harness, and the keys to 3 Winter Route vehicles. Loss had not left the house. It remained in the scarf, the empty chair, and the moments Caleb still turned to speak before remembering who was gone. But loss was no longer the only thing living there. There were muddy paw prints near the door. There were route schedules on the table. There was an old dog sleeping without being asked to work, and a young dog carrying someone's stolen glove down the hallway. Caleb had once believed loyalty meant standing guard over what had been lost. Flint and Tess taught him something harder. Sometimes loyalty meant opening a road that grief had closed. Sometimes it meant knocking on a stranger's door. And sometimes it meant allowing the love that once carried a man home to continue traveling, 1 winter mile at a time. Sometimes the right choice does not bring an easy victory. It may cost comfort, approval, or the security of staying silent. Caleb learned that loyalty is not something we inherit, own, or sell. It is something we honor through the choices we make, especially when another life has trusted us to do what is right. In our own lives, we may never face a town council or uncover a hidden scheme, but every day gives us smaller chances to protect trust, speak honestly, and reopen a door that grief or fear once closed. Perhaps God's quiet grace is often found there, not in grand miracles, but in one faithful decision that helps another soul find its way home. Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments. If you value stories about courage, loyalty, and second chances, please subscribe and join us for the next one. May you have the strength to choose what is right and the peace to keep your heart open.